In this Back to the Basics Part 3 video, I'm going to show you around the user interface just a little bit, and then we're going to install HACS, the Home Assistant Community Store, and install a custom component or two from HACS. So let's get started. I want to start out by going over a few of the UI features in Home Assistant. That's something I probably should have done on the first video, but I overlooked it. So let me go through it. If you're already familiar with the UI, you can skip over this part. I've indexed the video so you can go right to the HACS, which will be our next section. So one of the biggest things that you need to make sure you're aware of, some of the features here are not enabled unless you enable the advanced section or turn on advanced mode. And here in Home Assistant, you come down to your little icon or your username here, and you come down here and you enable advanced mode. So things like SSH, restarting the server, some of those things are not available unless you enable advanced mode. And if you're curious about it, you can always click on the Learn More button here, and this turns on or gives you some more information. Anyway, there's that. And then if you want to choose the theme, same area, you can choose the theme from auto to light to dark. Auto lets you also choose your gradient colors or your different colors. So I can make that a dark blue and maybe make this like a greenish color. And then the different screens will have different views. I don't know where the green shows up, but the dark blue, of course, shows that. And then, of course, you can go to dark mode for those that like the dark mode. You can change the order and hide items from the taskbar. And let me go back to light mode, easier to see here. So you can edit the taskbar and see how it shakes like you're used to some phones and stuff doing this. You can move things around in the order of the taskbar or the sidebar. I like to keep that on top and maybe put my add guard second. Things I use, I put farther up to the top. Just these that are right here are the ones that move. These down here at the bottom do not move. Only the shimmy shakers move. All right, so that's done. So you click on done up here. All right, you can also set it to always hide the sidebar. And so now if you want to get the sidebar, you click over here. That frees up some real estate, especially on smaller displays. So that's a nice thing to have. You can enable or disable the vibration on the device. Now remember, these things are per device. So if I set all this up on my computer here, if I go to my phone, these settings may not apply. So you'll have to do the same thing. You come down here to your little icon, your name, and your settings for your device that you're running it on. So you could set different settings for different devices. If you want to have dark mode on your PC and somebody else wants to have light mode on their device, or you want to have a tablet with light mode or a different color scheme, you can do that because each device is separate. You can enable or disable push notifications. Again, we talked about advanced mode. You can close the connection, and you can do keyboard shortcuts. And keyboard shortcuts are things like you hit the C key and it takes you to different places, or you hit the E key and you can find an entity. All right, so let me go ahead and turn on the sidebar again just so we have that available to us. And you notice also that you can collapse the sidebar just to icons or leave it open all the time. A few other sections that you probably want to spend some time in are developer tools. Developer tools up here, you have states, services, template, and events. States allow you to look at the states of your entities, and you can search for those. So if I just wanted to look at the power status of my Raspberry Pi, there it is. You can filter on the states. If I only want to look for things that are turned on, so I'll remove this filter, or have the word ON in it. Horizon obviously has ON in it. I want to look for those. Then I can filter there. If I only want to look for attributes, so let's say I only want to look for stuff related to RPI, Raspberry Pi, that's fine. Or if I had a weather card, then I have something related to weather or WX, depending on how it's set up. So you can filter all the different attributes. If you have a lot of different things in a lot of entities, it's sometimes necessary or sometimes desirable to turn off the attributes. Then you're just getting this thing. You can filter down and just pull up a couple of things and then pull the attributes. If you have lots of devices that have lots of attributes, you're going to end up just filling that whole screen and taking a long time to load. So a lot of times I'll turn off attributes till I filter down to what I'm looking for. And so let's say I'm looking for RPI power status. I want to look for the attributes just on that. Now I don't have to wait for all those attributes to load for every entity on my device. All right, so that's the entities. You'll spend some time in this trying to find things or looking for status of things, because not everything is going to be on the dashboard. You're going to maybe need to find a name or whatever. So this is an important section to be in. Services allow you to call specific services. So I could do like a switch turn on or off, and then find an entity ID to do that against. I don't have any entities in here with switches on, so we're not going to do that. But you can call services directly from within Home Assistant without having to build an automation or put a dashboard item or whatever. This allows you to test things, see what they do. Templates allow you to take specific templated items, build them out here as a test before you put them live into your Home Assistant integration. I'm not going to go into templates right now. They're pretty advanced, but just know that this is in this section. This is a default template. This is what this template shows on the right from what you have put in here on the left. And then events is another section. You can fire an event on the event bus. And here are all the different events that you can fire. Again, this is more advanced. This is just showing you in the UI where these things are. So I'm not going to go into detail on this right now. Supervisor we talked about in my first video. This is where you want to make sure that you are keeping up with your updates. And of course, we can see that we have an operating system update. We're on 5.9. Operating system is 5.10, so we're going to want to update that at some point. Add-on store we talked about. This is where you'll get your add-ons, your snapshots. We talked about that in system. So we went through all that. And then configuration is a big place where you'll spend some time. This is where you'll do things like set up your Home Assistant cloud. You'll click on and go into integrations to set those up. You'll manage devices, entities. You can set up and manage areas. And then coming down here, you've got blueprints, automations, scenes, scripts, helpers, tags, dashboards, people zones users, general server controls, logs, and info. This section here is probably pretty important for you to make sure you know where this is. So under server controls, you're going to do a lot of work where you may need to restart a section of Home Assistant or a part of Home Assistant, or you're going to need to restart the whole thing. Configuration validation is very important. So you always want to click that before you restart anything. You can restart the server here, and then you can restart specific sections of Home Assistant. So you can do automations, groups, entities, notify servers, Boolean states, etc., etc. So this is an important area you'll spend some time in. Logs is somewhere you'll also want to spend some time in. So you'll see here I've got some log entries, some things I probably need to look up and figure out. But you have this log here, and then you can load the full log, which actually gives you more detail on what some of these entries are above. And of course, you can do the refresh to get latest log entries. The log's important, especially when you're installing a new integration, a new entity, a new whatever, or you're updating something, or something stops working. You come to the logs. Someone's going to say, if you go to a forum, can you post the logs? Well, here's a section of the logs where you can find that. And then finally, the info section tells you what you're running in Home Assistant. I'm on version 2021.1.0. And then I have my system health here, my cloud information. I'm not on cloud on my development environment. I am on the production. That's the Nabu Casa cloud. And then my supervisor information. And then all of my integrations that I currently have or currently are available. All right, so those, and then of course notifications. You will get notifications if something goes on with your system that the system thinks you need to know about. Common examples are you need to re-authenticate to an integration. An integration needs an update or has an issue. You have some sort of thing that is outside of the norm on the operation of Home Assistant. So all these things are notifications that'll pop up. And then of course the rest of this stuff, overview is just the dashboard. That's the initial dashboard. Some map information. Logbook gives you some information on things that have occurred. History, if you have it enabled, and I do on this system, gives you the history of all your entities. This can get quite overwhelming. There's just a lot of stuff in here. So you can filter. I can choose RPI power status as the only thing I want to display in my history. And then of course you can choose date ranges to view everything with. And stuff like that. File editor, we talked about, it's an add-on. Terminal's an add-on. Media browser. Now I've never messed with media browser, but you can do stuff with media. On a Pi, on an SD card, I'm not going to put media on my SD card on my Pi. That's crazy. So I'm not going to do that. So those are the main things in the UI that you need to pay attention to. Once you go through all of this and get it set up in your UI the way you want, once you start adding integrations and adding entities, then you'll start working with your dashboards and things like that. So just a brief overview on the UI. I apologize I didn't do that on the first video. If you have any questions about the UI, make sure you comment down below. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to HACS and getting HACS installed. So let's get started on that. All right, so now we're going to talk about HACS. And what is HACS? HACS is the Home Assistant Community Store. It's a powerful user interface that allows you to work with all of your custom integrations, custom front end, so cards and integrations and things like that. It allows you to do all of this within the UI without having to do a lot of code work. And this is something that's been an improvement from the earlier days of Home Assistant, in which you had to do all of this manually, copy files, put them in folders on your Home Assistant instance, go in and configure things manually and all of that. HACS takes care of a lot of that for you. So I'm going to be following along on the hacs.xyz site to do the integration. If you follow the documentation on there, it should be pretty simple for you to install this. So first thing we're going to do is head over to installation. I want to talk about some of these prerequisites that they list here. You need to have Home Assistant at least version 2012 or 2020.12. You need to have a GitHub account. They are free, but the reason you need a GitHub account is that you're going to log in with your GitHub credentials to get the repositories and download the stuff from GitHub. You need a supported Home Assistant installation. Today we're going with the Raspberry Pi 4, which is supported because I downloaded and installed it from Home Assistant itself, from their website. You need access to the file system where Home Assistant is located. We'll do that through the terminal/SSH add-on. And then things like you need to know how to access the Home Assistant log file. I showed you that earlier in this video. And then a stable internet connection. You know, that's just a given. All right, so those are the prerequisites. If you don't have all these prerequisites, you will not have a good time installing Home Assistant Community Store. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure we have an add-on called Terminals and SSH. You can find this in the add-on store, and I covered it in my Basics Part 2 video. So you can just search for Terminal and SSH. If you don't have it installed, you can click on it, and then you can install it. I have it installed and I have it running, and I also have it shown in the sidebar over here. So it's sitting right here under Terminal. And the reason you're going to need to do that is you're going to have to type a command line to get the initial HACS files onto your server so that we can work with those. So we'll go into a terminal, and on that side I just showed you, we will need a command, a wget command, and that goes out and it gets wget gets the files that we need. So let's get that command now from the wiki page. All right, so I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to paste that into the terminal window, and I'm going to hit enter. And now it's going out, and it's super fast. So it went out and it found the directory, found the configuration, created the custom components directory, which is something we had to do manually in the past. It changed the directory, downloaded the files, created the directory, unpacked it, removed the zip files, and it completed that. Now, you have to restart Home Assistant once you do this, but I'm not going to do that quite yet. There are a couple things I want to talk about first. Talked about on the FAQs for this, the initial startup. So HACS doesn't know what it's supposed to show. There's like no central server. HACS just relies on information. It's just a fetching mechanism for GitHub. And it does a little bit of stuff on Home Assistant where it puts the files. So it doesn't know anything about the default repositories. It has to download all of that. And what it talks about here is in the GitHub API, which is what we're using to get this stuff, is rate limited. And so when you hit the rate limit, it's going to pause to the GitHub communication to the GitHub API until the rate limit reset, and that can take up to an hour. So this is the most important part here. For new installation of HACS with the current amount of default repositories, you're going to hit the rate limit when you do an initial startup after installing HACS. So whenever you install this, it's going to be in this startup mode for up to an hour as it's pulling in all of the repositories, getting all the updates, and then doing all the stuff that it does. So be patient when you first install this. You're going to have to wait an hour, potentially, depending on the rate limiting and all the number of default repositories, in order to get it completed. So just want to make sure you're aware of that. All right, so now that we've talked about the rate limiting, let's go ahead and just do a quick restart of Home Assistant just for sanity. Make sure everything's in the right place and everything's good. So I'll click on Server Controls, always check your configuration. It's valid, and we're going to go ahead and restart Home Assistant. Home Assistant is now restarted, so it's time to move on to our next step. And that's going to be actually adding the integration in Home Assistant. So we're going to go over to Configuration, click on Integrations, and we're going to add this integration, or click on this Add Integration button down here at the bottom right. And in this, we're going to search for HACS. And this won't show up in the integrations until you do the steps that we've already done. So make sure you do those first and then restart Home Assistant. So I'm going to click on HACS, and now the integration is being installed. Now as this runs, this could take a while itself. So the wiki talks about the fact that if this takes more than 10 minutes, then something's wrong with your Home Assistant install, and you'll have to troubleshoot that. So we're going to sit here and just let it do its thing for a little bit, and we'll come back to it whenever it's finished. Okay, so that only took a couple of minutes or less. So what you're going to have now is you're going to have this dialog box pop up, and you need to agree to all of these. None of these are optional. So you need to check all these boxes. I know how to access the logs. I know there are no add-ons in HCS. Everything inside HCS is custom and untested by Home Assistant. That's important. Remember, HACS is a community store. The items in there are added by the community, so people like you and I who write these add-ons. And so they don't get tested by the Home Assistant team itself. Also, you know that if you have issues with Home Assistant, you should disable the custom components. So if you install a custom component through HACS and all of a sudden your Home Assistant starts going wonky, disable that integration or that custom component you just installed to see if that was what was causing it. So let's click all those and then we will submit. And now what we need to do, since HACS now uses OAuth, we're going to use OAuth to authorize the HACS on my development server here to go into GitHub and get things. So this is the authorized key to do that. So I'm going to open this up. As it says, it opens in a new window. You need to log into GitHub. And now it wants the device activation code, which is right here in these little tiny letters. So I'm going to throw those in here. And these will go away after the video, so don't worry about that. Continue. It's going to ask you to authorize this. You'll see HACS. Authorize all of this. Congratulations, you're all set. Now it says come back over here and click submit. And now we've found HACS. And you can assign it to an area if you want to. I'm just going to leave it alone and we'll click on finish. Now that it's installed, you can click on options. And you can set any of these things you want. So this is the side panel title. You'll notice that HACS shows up over here somewhere. I have to find it here in a minute. You can do the icon. I'll just leave it as HACS. Number of releases to show. Filter with country code. You can enable app daemon apps. You can enable net daemon, enable debug, enable experimental features. I'm going to leave all these unchecked because I don't need those right now. And then we'll just submit. And now my options are all successfully saved. Okay, so I had to restart Home Assistant, and it's probably something that was necessary. I don't know that it was clear in the documentation, but once you install everything, do another restart of Home Assistant, and then your HACS icon will show up here on the left, on the dash, or on the left bar here. So click on HACS, and now this is a part we talked about in the FAQs. HACS is starting up. During this time, some information might be missing or incorrect. We could go in here and look around, but we're not going to see anything yet, because it is going out to GitHub and it is pulling all of those default or custom repositories that are already in Home Assistant Community Store. And we will have to wait for it to get all of those. And like I said, it could take up to an hour or more depending on the API rate limiting and how many of those repositories are already out there. So let's let this sit. We'll come back in a little while, and once this HACS startup message is gone, then we can start using HACS and installing a custom component or whatever. So we'll work on that in here in a little bit. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so the Home Assistant Community Store startup message is gone now. That disappeared pretty quick, actually, and it took still a little bit of time for anything to show up, and I'll show you what I mean here. If you click on Explorer and Add Repositories, you'll see all the repositories here. But what you will see when you click on this, and I can't do it now because it's already past time, but if you click on this and you get no information, that means that it's still downloading all of the repos and you might be API rate limited. So let me go to Frontend here. We have no repositories installed right now. And I'm going to explore and add a repository. There's a couple of steps you have to do here. And you can see just the sheer number of different types of repositories, custom components and things you can add to Home Assistant. I've got it currently sorted by stars, which is the default. You can sort by name, and you can sort by last updated. If you want to see what was either last updated or last added, these are the things that are in there. I'm going to go back to stars, and I'm going to click on the mini graph card. And when you do that, it automatically goes out and grabs information from the information from the GitHub repository. And this is kind of what the preview is for that. This talks about how to install it. So this card obviously is available in HACS because that's where we found it. If you want to do a manual install, you can still do that, but HACS automates that for us. So we're just going to install this repository in HACS by clicking the button right here. So we're just going to move that, or we're just going to click on this button right here. We're not going to show the beta versions. I like to stick on things that are more stable, especially in a production system. And you can actually select different versions to install. I'm going to install just the regular most current version. And it says you need to clear your browser cache when changing levelless resources. Do you want to do that now? You click on reload, it automatically reloads it for you. Some of the integrations you install in HACS will actually require you to restart Home Assistant itself, and it will tell you that normally. All right, so now we have the mini graph card installed as a front end item. Let's install another one just to show you what we're doing here. And I'm going to look for one I use a lot, which is a button card, a custom button card. So I'll click on this. And by the way, you can go directly to the repository by clicking this button right here. And it'll take you to the repository with all the files and all of the configuration, raw configuration information and everything else. Custom button card has a lot of configuration options. So it has a really long GitHub page here. So we can close that out. We don't need to do anything there. We want to install this repository. It's the same thing we do when we installed the other one. They're all fairly simple. Click on install, tell you to reload the cache, which it does. So we reload the cache there. And now we have the button card and the mini graph card installed. And now you can use these within Home Assistant. One thing you need to make sure you do is you make sure those resources are loaded. I go to configuration and I come down here to Leveless Dashboard and I look at resources. I should see both of those two custom components in my resources section here and the type of resource they are. So these are both JavaScript modules. If it doesn't show up here, Home Assistant is not going to know about it, therefore it's not going to work. And that may be a function of you just doing a reload of the cache on your browser. Also, some of those that require you to restart Home Assistant, like an integration, they will not show up potentially here until you do that. So if you want to use one of these custom components you installed in HACS, you can do that through the dashboard, depending on the type of component it is, of course. So I can now add a card, and I'm going to search for the graph card. Now, you won't always have these HACS components show up in this selection. You may have to use a manual card or something like that. In this case, the custom mini graph card does work, and it specifies custom mini graph card, but we still have to do some work to be able to have it work for us. So we'll have to specify entities, and I'm going to put in an entity called sensor WH65 TempF. That I know is my outdoor temperature sensor. And then I can save that. And now I have this temperature sensor within my Home Assistant dashboard using a custom component that I installed through HACS. There are dozens and dozens or more custom components you can install in Home Assistant. And one of the options you can do as well, in addition to integration or front end, is you can do integrations. These are integrations that people write that allow you to connect other systems or other devices into Home Assistant. And they're not necessarily ones that are available in the core Home Assistant add-ons. So you have things like Sonoff, the media players, you have Unify Protect, all of these are in here. And these are things that take a little bit more integration once you install them. So let's say we look at this one and it's loading the information. You need to understand the requirements and how to set these things up. So when you get into the world of HACS, the integration or the front end is pretty easy. It's basically display items that allow you to display your sensors in a new or different way. And the integrations are more along the lines of bringing in other systems, and that requires you to understand the other system as well as how you would configure that within Home Assistant. So keep those in mind when you're building this out. HACS makes it easy to install the files necessary for the custom components. It doesn't always mean that it's going to be easy to get the integrations to work. So keep that in mind when you're putting these in. Again, the front end stuff is fairly simple. Follow the information and the documentation and the repositories on the front ends. Those are typically display items. They're much easier than the integrations themselves. I really hope that this was helpful to you. This is again part 3 of my Back to the Basics series. If you need other things or want other things that are basic items to do in Home Assistant and you want me to make a video on that, make a comment down below. Please make sure that you hit the subscribe button over here. Again, hit the like button if you liked the video, and we will see you on the next one.